The following presentation is rated PG. Viewer discretion is advised.
Those are your hands?
It was an unforgettable fantasy from one of Hollywood's most imaginative directors. It was a daring movie breakthrough for a TV heartthrob out to shatter his image.
The character just had this profound, effect on me.
Hold me. I can't.
And it offered a movie swan song for a silver screen legend.
I have a present for you.
A cutting-edge filmmaker, a struggling star in the making, and a real-life Hollywood love affair. On Hollywood Backstories, Edward Scissorhands.
Hello? Avon calling. Why are you hiding back there? You don't have to hide from me. I'm Peg Boggs. I'm your local Avon representative, and I'm as harmless as cherry pie. I can see that I've disturbed you. How stupid of me. I'll just be going now.
Don't go.
What happened to you?
Released in 1990, Edward Scissorhands told the fantastic and touching tale of a kindly inventor's unfinished creation. A boy with scissors for hands who longs for acceptance from the hostile world around him.
What's your name?
Edward?
I think you should just come home with me.
The character is an outsider and is very different and feels very different from everyone else, but yearns to be understood. And I think that's the beauty of Edward Scissorhands.
Edward Scissorhands was the most personal film to date for director Tim Burton, a former Disney animator who based the character on his own teenage longings.
It first started out of just those very simple teenage impulses of the feeling of wanting to touch and wanting to communicate but not being able to.
As a teen in the early 1970s, Tim Burton was both fascinated and repelled by the cookie-cutter world of suburbia that surrounded him.
Tim grew up in Burbank, and that kind of homogeneity, the consistency of the houses looking the same, the weirdness of, going into your friend's house and it's the same house as your house. It's so formative for Tim.
He was a loner. He wore braces till he was, I think, 17, and he was like the odd man out. But he enjoyed it because he observed.
When he wasn't at the movies, enjoying the elegant villainy of his idol Vincent Price, Tim expressed himself through drawing. And among his sketches was the picture of a boy who summed up Tim's own sense of being different. In the years that followed, Burton used his imaginative gifts to launch himself as a filmmaker. And in 1986, he was introduced to a writer named Caroline Thompson, who shared his quirky sensibility.
I had written a really twisted little Gothic novel, and so we immediately realized we were kindred souls and knew we wanted to work together. Tim said, well, there is this drawing that I made in high school, and it's of this guy who's got scissors instead of hands. It was like the angels opened up. It was the stupidest image I had ever heard in my life, and it was the most brilliant image I had ever heard in my life. It was brilliant because it so clearly expressed how people feel.
Without even seeing the drawing, Thompson excitedly began work on a first draft, which drew from her own similar experiences in suburbia.
The movie started out as a musical in our minds. I wrote some hilarious lyrics. One of the favorite song was, I Can't Handle It. We were afraid that this sort of slight edge of surreality that we wanted to play with wouldn't be acceptable to people, and that if you did a musical, you could do anything. But when Tim read the first draft, he just immediately felt that it was going to work on its own.
By the time Thompson and Burton signed off on the script, Tim had agreed to make what was destined to be a mega-budget blockbuster, Batman. But for Burton, no project was more personal than Edward Scissorhands. And in 1989, thanks to the success of Batman, he and producer Denise Denovi secured one of the most extraordinary studio deals of the day.
We would develop the script, and if they liked it, fine. If they didn't, fine. But we weren't going to go through the development process, making a film by committee.
I would turn the script in, and 1 week later, the studio had to say yes or no. And that was that.
In 1989, 20th Century Fox gave Burton and his team a green light and a budget of $20 million, even though the script was defiantly different from any other. The director knew that Edward Scissorhands' success depended on the actor who would play the title role.
Tom Cruise sniffed around it for a long time and was really into it, but got hung up on how does he go to the bathroom. Well, I didn't want to go there. Bill Hurt wanted to do it really badly. And Robert Downey Jr. I do remember, and actually I thought was a terrific idea.
But there was another candidate, Johnny Depp, the real-life boyfriend of Edward Scissorhands' leading lady, Winona Ryder. By 1989, the 26-year-old actor had achieved stardom on the TV teen hit 21 Jump Street. But Depp's heartthrob looks were deeply at odds with his sensitive and quirky personality.
The general public had been sold an image, which was a character that I played on television, and not anything like what that character was.
When Depp read Edward Scissorhands, he bonded instantly with the character, who was also totally misunderstood due to his appearance.
I'll never forget it. He walked in, he's very shy, and he kind of was looking around for us, and I just saw these eyes looking around, these big, gentle, doe eyes, and Tim and I just looked at each other like, that's him, you know?
That's my family. Now, come along, dear, and I'll show you the rest of the house.
Burton had found his movie alter ego. He had also scored a shrewd casting coup, pairing two real-life lovers in their first film together.
Winona was just 18. This was kind of really her first big romance, and it made it a more special experience for everybody, I think, because they were really falling in love.
We were both nervous before we started, but it's been going really well, and I think it's one of the best experiences I've ever had. It's exciting and scary, but that only makes you want to do a better job.
But audiences expecting a traditional love story were in for a shocking surprise. Like the character himself, Edward Scissorhands the movie was about to step out into a strange and sometimes dangerous new world.
See, I was hoping for something big and kind of bouffant, kind of like mine. Now, don't you worry, Kisses, you're gonna be just fine, honey. You're gonna be so pretty. Yes, you are. Oh. Oh, Eddie, is there anything you can't do? You take my very breath away, I swear. Look at this. Have you ever cut a woman's hair?
On March 26, 1990, director Tim Burton assembled his cast of rising stars and award-winning veterans like Alan Arkin and Diane Wiest for the first day of filming on Edward Scissorhands. It came after an intensive search for the perfect locale to film the story. Ultimately, Burton found his fantasy suburbia in a newly built community near Tampa, Florida.
About half the houses hadn't been sold yet. It was like having our own little back lot to shoot in.
Well, one thing in the movie that was inspired by shooting in Florida was the waterbed. When Tim went on a location scout, every house he went to had a waterbed.
Fortunately, inspiration and perspiration went hand in hand on the humid Florida shoot.
Johnny was a saint making that movie because wearing that suit in the heat in Florida, the suit was really skin tight. We put a kind of a cooling element underneath, but it didn't really work, and the hands are heavy.
More difficult for Depp was the actor's ongoing struggle to bring humanity to a character that began as a two-dimensional drawing.
A lot of the things that Tim and I talked about was just to maintain the purity of the character, and things that people would set on their tables would become fascinating and another world for him. I knew that early on it would rely on gestures and expressions. And Charlie Chaplin, I watched a lot of Charlie Chaplin movies. The way he walked, I thought said so much about the character.
The first day of shooting, we reshot. We hadn't quite found the voice yet and the character.
One helpful insight to the role came from writer Caroline Thompson.
Well, I actually based the character on a dog that I used to have. She was so present that she could do just about everything but speak, and you could feel her, wanting to describe the world to you, wanting to participate. That's how Edward seemed to me.
I kept thinking of a dog. I kept thinking of that unconditional love, and the way that if you scold a dog, he cowers to the corner.
The character came alive with Johnny Depp's performance. It was brand new, and it was totally out of Johnny Depp's heart and mind. You sit back and you went, well, yeah, of course, that's him.
That was the single most thrilling experience of my whole life.
In finding the role, Depp was also helped by the character design of Oscar winner Stan Winston.
It was a stretch because Tim is the most free-thinking and imaginative director I've ever worked with. He's very theatrical. He is not grounded in what is the reality of these scissor hands. It was more of a challenge for me to think as freely as Tim. The blades on the glove hands were plastic. We actually created a pair for him early on so that he could take them home and try and figure out how would he get things done if actually he was encumbered by these hands.
Work with a remote control on a television set is virtually impossible. Going to the bathroom, you don't need, it's something you don't even want to talk about. It's just, but after a while, it just became the second nature.
We also created a mechanical pair, and we call them our insert hands, which were operated by 4 or 5 puppeteers that actually could cut.
Make it a 5-run inning and blow this game to pieces.
I'll be darned.
For Tim Burton, the most fulfilling aspect of Edward Scissorhands was the chance to work with the man who had been his lifelong hero, Vincent Price.
One of my favorite memories in my career is being able to witness Tim Burton working with Vincent Price because he really idolized Vincent.
Tim used to go see all those Corman horror movies at his local movie theater in Burbank, and he loved Vincent, I think, because he made evil understandable and seductive and charming.
By 1990, the 79-year-old legend was seriously ill, but Price gratefully accepted the role, a role that reflected Burton's own affection for the actor, who had become a real-life mentor.
There was an old man from the Cape who made himself garments of crepe. When asked, will they tear, he replied, here and there, but they keep such a beautiful shape. That's right. Go ahead, smile, it's funny. He creates Edward. He creates him out of a cookie heart, the heart of a cookie. It's a wonderful kind of comic, but very serious idea, because it is a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale with a moral.
For Tim, having my father validate his creative work was very important to him. The three of them, Tim and Johnny and my dad, connected.
To see Tim's face when he was directing Vincent, the delight and the love and the, just the respect that he had for him and how much Vincent appreciated that. It was a really beautiful relationship.
On July 20th, 1990, after 4 months of filming, Edward Scissorhands was ready for its crowning touch, a music score by Burton's favorite film composer, Danny Elfman.
Edward Scissorhands was definitely one of my favorite film scores because it was a very simple, clear narrative, musical narrative. There's an alienated character, and I think that's what he relates to, and that's what I relate to. A lot of directors would have listened to Edward's theme and go, I don't get it. This sounds like a Romanian, Hungarian, Jewish theme, and this character is not that. You know, there's nothing Eastern European about it. You know, what's the story here? But Tim would never do that. I don't think that way, and Tim doesn't think that way. When I finished Edward, I actually didn't think I'd done a very good job. I thought I'd kind of failed Tim. And in the end, it ended up being my most imitated piece. I've heard it used in 7, 8 major motion pictures and God knows how many commercials.
But in 1990, as Edward's release date approached, the movie's fate was anything but certain. Its delicate tone seemed even riskier after the worldwide success of Batman.
He and I were worried that people would say, oh, Tim Burton, the guy who did Batman, this is going to be like a big, you know, comic book movie. And this was a smaller personal story.
Previews, are always a disaster, especially with Tim's movies. Odd or unique movies always preview terribly. Tim was pacing around in the lobby trying not to throw up. And the audience who saw it so didn't get it. I mean, there were guys in Orange County where we previewed it that were actually siding with Anthony Michael Hall's character, the bad guy.
It's just a scratch, Jim, really. It's okay.
Stay back,
no,
okay? You touch again, I'll kill you.
No, it's no big deal. It's just
Call a doctor, you skewered kid.
No, listen.
Stay away from her, okay? I mean it. You can't touch anything without destroying it. Who the hell do you think you are? You've been hanging around here anyway, huh?
And they were going, well, I mean, he was right to want to beat up that fag because that fag was trying to take his girl. I swear to God, I kid you not, these were comments from the focus group after the movie. So you can imagine how Tim would react finishing that movie and hearing this kind of stuff from an audience.
It was a tricky film to market because from the visual you could think it was a horror movie or a scary character.
They did an ingenious ad campaign. They had all these images of the topiary, and all it said was Edward was here.
Gradually, the message was out that Edward Scissorhands was a movie that defied any label. And on the eve of its release, preview audiences responded in a way that delighted the story's author.
It might be best if he goes back up there. Because at least there he's safe.
And by the end, I heard sobbing. I was the happiest person on the planet. But while I was rejoicing, Tim's in the bathroom puking, so I imagine that it was all pretty tough for him.
On December 7th, 1990, Edward Scissorhands opened to solid box office and enthusiastic reviews, especially for Johnny Depp, who had finally shattered his pretty boy stereotype.
You really felt for this character who was obviously very gentle and a very deep, poetic, beautiful character that was hindered by these dangerous hands. Tim just makes these people so sympathetic and so accessible.
For Tim Burton, one rave review meant more than any other. Vincent Price loved the film, and his friendship with Burton only deepened until the actor's death 3 years later at age 82.
My dad loved the whole experience of working on Edward Scissorhands. It was really his swan song.
Edward Scissorhands marked a happy marriage of many creative talents, but ultimately, it reflected the singular vision of Tim Burton, who drew upon his own fears and insecurities to create a figure embraced by audiences around the world.
Goodbye. I love you.
I was able to write a love poem for Tim to express himself through. It was my gift to him. And it is an extremely personal film for him, and I'm thrilled that I could give him the means through which to do that.
It truly represents Tim Burton's vision and not mine. There is a seamless film with characters and settings and stories that is completely 100% Tim Burton.
Edward Scissorhands is, to me, Tim at his essence, because there's the gothic horror, there's this sort of bizarre sense of humor, but there's an underlying gentleness to it, which I think is wonderful.
Everybody at one point or another feels like Edward Scissorhands. They feel misunderstood, they feel excluded. Edward's yearning to be accepted and his ultimate acceptance of himself, those things are going to be felt by people forever.